Hey folks, welcome to CanHammer, your source for Warhammer from the Great White North. If there's anybody watching right now live, can you let me know how the sound is? Can you hear me okay? I'm assuming if you can see my lips move but you don't hear anything, you'll let me know. Nothing from the chat. Okay. So tonight is episode 2. Sound is good. Thank you very much. Okay, so tonight is episode 2 of our chaos discussion, where we're focusing right now on Death Guard. What we're going to go over tonight is the weaknesses and strength of Death Guard as an army. Oh, hey Steve, thanks for tuning in. The strengths and weaknesses of Death Guard as an army, and then we're also going to do a quick overview of all the plague companies. They're going to be placed in order of my preference. Not necessarily what are the most competitive, because I mean that's up for debate. I don't think there's any real concrete way of determining that. But in my opinion, what my favorites are and what I think are the most competitive. Before we get started on the Death Guard discussion, let's clear up some questions that we got from last episode. So, last episode we had someone bring up that in TTS, in some circles of TTS, that judges have been ruling for TTS events that for CSM, if you use the stratagem called Chaos Familiar, you could pass on warp time from one of your sorcerers. I guess it doesn't come from one of your sorcerers. You can use the warp time, the Chaos Familiar stratagem, my apologies, on Morty, who is souped in with that army, to then give him warp time, circumventing this whole fact that changed warp time for Morty. Now, I want to clear up why I don't think that works. So if somebody tries to pull that on you, you let them know you don't think that works. And honestly, I think TOs should be doing a little bit more due diligence. I could be wrong, but let's go over it. First, in the CSM book, we're talking the second version of the 8th ed release book, because CSM had 2 versions of their book released. There is an area that describes Legion. So open quote, capital Legion, close quote. This is where they describe, similar to chapters, whatever, the legions that you can take as a part of your CSM. So some data sheets specify what the legion the unit is from. In other words, or example, Abaddon the Despoiler has a Black Legion keyword. So is Black Legion, blah, blah, blah. And that would replace the Legion keyword. So for example, if you were to include a Chaos Lord in your army and you decided he was from the Alpha Legion, his Legion faction keyword would be Alpha Legion. And the Lord of Chaos would then read, you can reroll hits of 1 for Alpha Legion units. So I never warp time Morty anyways either. So where the problem is, what some people are trying to argue is that you can use, because in the Chaos Space Marine book, the stratagem Chaos Familiar that allows you to swap spells works on Heretic Astartes. So the thinking here is Morty is still a Heretic Astartes, so then you can use that stratagem on Morty, cross book, because there's no restriction there, to give Morty warp time. Actually, you probably can. You probably can give Morty warp time, but here's why it doesn't matter and it doesn't work. Because, based on the Legion description in the CSM book, the Death Guard, Thousand Sons, and Fallen deviate significantly in terms of organization and fighting style. As a result, you cannot choose one of these keywords when determining which Legion a unit in this codex is from. So, where this is coming, what this means is warp time will never develop the keyword of Death Guard, because it says right there that you cannot use it as a Legion in this book. So if you do try to give warp time to Morty, in my opinion, he ends up with warp time, open quote, Legion, close quote. In other words, he can't warp time anybody, let alone himself. So that's what I want to do. That's my argument to clear that up. Not only in spirit should you not be trying to warp time Morty. It seemed fairly clear that they're trying to close any instance of where you're able to do that. But that actual interaction was brought up, I don't think actually works, based on the argument of that in the Chaos Space Marine book specifically, it says that neither of those Thousand Sons or Death Guard cannot be used in the CSM book as a keyword for Legion. Now, Thousand Suns separately in the facts were described to have their own version of warp time with the Thousand Suns Legion keyword, so they get it. But nowhere in the Death Guard book does it say that whatever Death Guard is actually a Legion. So I don't think there's any way you can actually warp time Morty. So I just want to clear that up before we get started. If you like this content, I guess, share, subscribe. I feel like we have to say that stuff. But you can leave comments if you have questions, if you want to follow up on this debate, or if you have any other comments related to what we talk about tonight or chaos, throw them in the comments section and I'll look at them. I look at them almost every couple of days and I'll respond to them as best as I can. If you have any suggestions for further episodes or armies you want me to look at, we can do that as well. All right, let's fire this up. So, tonight we're looking at the Death Guard's weaknesses and strengths and how we're going to, take advantage of their strengths, how we can maybe circumvent their weaknesses. We'll hint at that, but that will be for later shows. And then we're going to go through the plague companies. So, Death Guard weaknesses. So, I feel like everybody knows these. Death Guard is known as an army that's very slow. I want to clarify that though. So as you can see here, I wrote that their infantry is very, very slow-ish. And what I mean by that is Death Guard actually has units that aren't, let's not kid ourselves. They're not Eldar fast. They're not, they're not speeding across the table. But, some of their units like drones, movement 10 inches, Plague Burst Crawlers are 9, Demon Prince with wings is 10 inches. That's not an example of super, super fast, but it's also not quite that slow. But of course, their infantry, Poxwalkers are movement 4, Death Shroud are 5, everything else is 5. So that's, that can be painfully slow, especially with a lot of new armies that have a lot of mobility or ability to, be at different areas of the table or have range on you. That can be a major hindrance towards of enacting your plan and, interacting with the enemy. Recently the fact said that the inexorable advance special rule actually works the way everybody thought it did, and we don't suffer through the difficult terrain penalties, which I think is excellent. It helps us circumvent that, and that regardless of where this difficult terrain is, we can use that to our advantage. For one, that we can use that to get a clutch -1 hit, and two, you can actually bring the enemy down to your level where you fight in these areas. If you're on a board with difficult terrain, it's to your advantage almost to run into that, because if the enemy wants to come to you, they're going to be -2 movement where you're not suffering that. Death Guard also tends to be a low unit count army. So, I wouldn't consider it MSU. A lot of players run it with a couple Plague Burst Crawlers, a couple Big Blocks Terminators, a couple units of Poxwalkers, your characters, and they call it a day. We're not talking, it's not an army that's like Harlequins, it's not an army that's like Drukhari, where they'll have 6 units of OBSEC, not Mandrakes, whatever their crap is, Cabal units, Witches, and they'll all be in a Raider, and then they have everything else, So they have this a fantastic ability to just throw away units, trade them, place units wherever they want in the table, whatever else. Death Guard doesn't have that. So combining how slow the infantry can be and your low unit count, in fact, the deployment phase is one of the most crucial phases for Death Guard. You have to get that right. You have to know what you want to do and how you're going to do it early in the deployment phase, because you have almost no ability to correct deployment mistakes. So the second you start making deployment mistakes, and if they're big, it's gonna be an uphill battle fighting that and fighting your enemy. Limited OBSEC. So I'm saying that because we have Plague Marines that are OBSEC and we have Poxwalkers that are OBSEC. It's limited because, in my opinion, Plague Marines compete quite a bit with the Terminators. When you look at a Plague Marine, what it can do, the points cost, and you compare it to a Terminator, you start to wonder why you don't want to pay just a couple more points to get that Terminator. Of course, yes, Plague Marines have OBSEC, so maybe there's that benefit. Regardless, that's one unit that moves 5. As well, we have Poxwalkers, and Poxwalkers are dirt cheap. They're 5 points a model. But at the same time, as you'll see in the next point, you're restricted based on your army composition on how many units of poxwalkers you can have. So you can only have as many units of poxwalkers as you do have bubonic Astartes infantry units. So we're talking Plague Marines or the Terminators. And I mean, if you don't have a lot of Terminator units, if you don't have Plague Marine units, you can't take poxwalkers. So you can't fire up your army list and you can't put down 3x20 poxwalkers, then continue. Then poxwalkers are almost a near end of the like as you're composing your list, is almost one of the last things you add, because you have to see what you have that enables you to use poxwalkers. And on top of that, though poxwalkers are OBSEC, I mean, they're cheap. They're dirt cheap, don't get me wrong, which is fantastic. They're slow. They're movement 4, so they're slower than the Terminators. They're T4, which is good. They have a 6-up feel no pain, or it's not called discussing resilient, whatever it's called in the book. It's a 6-up ignore wounds rule. And I mean, there we go. They can't do actions other than the spread the sickness action in the book, which, you know, I actually do like the spread the sickness secondary. But at the same time, that's not always an appropriate secondary depending on what army you're facing and what mission you're in. And that limits you. So yes, they're OBSEC, and yes, they're a troop, and yes, they're cheap, but they also limit you in terms of what secondaries you can take. And of course, unless you're taking them in big units of 20, and even then sometimes we're seeing units like AdMech that have the firepower to remove a unit of 20 without breaking a sweat. They're also exposing you to stuff like, they don't expose you to grind them down, but what they do is they prevent you from getting grinded down if that's ever something you want to, something you want to consider as a secondary when you're playing your games. Keep in mind with this discussion, these are our discussion revolves around book Death Guard. We're not talking about Terminus Est. We can do if people are interested that are watching this, want to learn, want to talk about Terminus Est, we can do a special episode on Terminus Est, because that kind of changes fundamentally how we approach Death Guard. I mean, for one, you can't use any vehicles, and I'm starting to see, and I think a lot of other people see as well, that some of the more successful Death Guard lists happen to be a little bit more mechanized, which, I mean, obviously is actually quite fluffy. So here we go. This is what I think are some of the major weaknesses that Death Guard have. We will talk about in the future. We'll come back to these and see how maybe we can circumvent some of these. Let's forecast a little. For example, the infantry are slow, except your Terminators can deep strike. When you look at speed, speed is obviously how quickly a unit can get from point A to point B. So we'll never be able to just, from one point to another, just run there or fly there like, Eldari can. But there are ways that we can take advantage of other rules, or like Deep Strike or like Bodyguard rule, where we can make up for that a little. For example, Deep Strike, we're not fast, but we can later start where we want to be and choose. I mean, yes, the opponent has the ability to kind of screen you out, but I mean, 3-man units of Death Route are still kind of tough to screen out because it's still a small footprint. Another example is if you take a Demon Prince and you have it within 3 inches of a unit of Death Shroud. The unit of Death Shroud, if you can get them to hide somewhere and be within 3 inches of your Demon Prince that is forward projecting his threat, that's an element of like where you can make up that speed, where you don't have to keep the Demon Prince behind your lines worried about losing him. He can actually sit up front and threaten the enemy right where he wants to, where the enemy wants to go and where the Demon Prince wants to go. So these are kind of examples how we might be able to circumvent some of these weaknesses. All right, let's go on to their strengths. Death Guard strengths. They have a lot of different range bands, and they're efficient in a lot of different ranges. What do I mean by that? Well, some armies work almost exclusively at the 24-inch. Some armies are really good at longer ranges. Some armies are really good at close combat. Death Guard are kind of unique where they have tools for almost every range band. I'm not going to say they're AdMech where they can send tons of shots down range at 48 inches and whatever else. But like Plague Burst Crawlers have a 48-inch mortar that is, strength 8, AP 2 damage. You can upgrade that to 3 damage. They have their 36-inch range entropy cannons that are strength 8, AP 4, D3 plus 3 damage. You can use the stratagem to increase range on that entropy cannon if you need to squeak out 6 more inches. So if you want that kind of long range firepower, they have it. They have even longer range firepower with the Contemptor Dreadnought. Now this is more of a light vehicle anti-infantry, but it's excellent for those roles where it's strength 6, AP nothing, damage 2, and does mortal wounds on 6s. Combo him with the Tallyman and Tollkeeper. He's pumping out a lot of shots. He's doing a lot of wounds, and he's taking out a lot of guys. That's something that a lot of the other units don't have. At the 12-inch range, you've got a lot of flamers. All the Death Shrouds have flamers. They're only strength 3, but if you coincide that with your contagion and -1 toughness, a lot of stuff you can get a wound on 4s, some stuff you can wound on 3s. You also have storm or combi bolters on your Terminators and whatever else. And then, of course, at close combat, we're monsters. We're killers in close combat. So, you can design an army that has tools for just about every range band and every unit type. You'll have to be a bit more surgical in how you apply them. This is not AdMech or Drukhari where you can just waste a million shots somewhere because you have a ton in the bank. No, you have to be very precise on where you want to place those shots, but you have the access to that. So, that's a plus. We are very, very tough. As a rule, -1 damage across your whole army, I think is a bit undervalued. What I feel right now is happening with that is you're getting this competition at the top. There was the Marines, and now you have the Drukhari, and then you have AdMech showing up. And all of this is doing is creating this swirling kind of melee in the meta where weapon options are changing in response to each other. But what happens is once they start focusing on lower number of high powered shots, that kind of benefits us because everybody has an invul save. So, a lot of those end up being wasted. And then, of course, unless they're the D3+3, they can often be wasted if they're only at the D6 damage, because if they roll a 3, it only does 2 damage. If they start leaning towards having a lot of volume in terms of the low strength, low AP shots, we're top 5 and we're 2-up armor. So that's going to be harder to get through us. Of course, some of the AdMech stuff recently is a little insane. We're going to see they don't have a FAQ out yet. We have to see where how that exists. In a bubble, it seems very potent, but we'll have to see how the meta adjusts to AdMech and where AdMech goes in response. But at the end of the day, if AdMech shows up and they have a lot of strength 3 shooting because of their Vanguard or Rangers or whatever it's called, it's not the end of the world. And we can, potentially adjust to that. I've played a couple of games against AdMech, and, one I lost, one I won. And I feel like they are very powerful, and you have to be a bit more big brain when you're approaching that game, but it's not like a futile effort, in my opinion. We're combat monsters. So there are a few armies in the game that really stand up to some of our combat units like Death Shroud or Demon Princes and stuff like that. Especially if you start to combine, for example, if you've got a big unit of Blight Lords with the Biologist Putrefier, they'll just annihilate everything. Same thing with Death Shroud. You run them on their double attack profile with the Biologist Putrefier. There's nothing that's going to withstand that. That's a big benefit. So a lot of armies will be hesitant to come into you. I had a game, for example, and you can organize different units and take advantage of their synergy to really prevent even dedicated close combat units coming at you from doing anything. So, for example, I had a game where, I don't know if what they're called, is it Rust Stalkers, where they do mortal wounds and they fight last. Well, in this game, I had my Demon Prince, and the similar trick I was talking about. I had hidden Death Shroud Terminators, had the Demon Prince up front, and then I had the Foul Blightspawn up front. Nearby, I had the Fleshmoor Drone. Those guys charged in, and they fight lasted my Demon Prince, but then my Blightspawn fight lasted them. At the same time, my Fleshmoor Drone heroicked. So what that meant was my Fleshmoor Drone went before everybody, and he picked up like 8 of those guys, which was amazing, right? And so then they only have 2 guys left. They bounce off, and then the Demon Prince cleans the rest of them up. So, if you really take advantage of your placing and your rules, you can circumvent even units that are dedicated and they're really going in there to try to outcompete you in that department. And I feel like another strength that we have are contagions. It's our special rule, and it's something where basically your whole army, as the game proceeds, is exuding this debuff across the enemy army. And I mean, that can be pretty significant when you're considering you're making Marines toughness 3, you're making anything that's not a Marine toughness 2, when you're just throwing little bolters at them. For example, if you just push a drone, increases contagion range with a spell nearby a sisters unit or guard unit, and make them toughness 2, all of a sudden your combi bolters or even your regular bolters are wounding all those guys on 2s. And I mean, that can make a difference when you're throwing shots at them, sometimes small shots. You can even move toughness 5 units down to toughness 4, allowing your mortars to wound on 2s. I mean, there's a lot you can do there. I think it's a little undervalued, but I think there's a lot of play there. And on top of that, as we'll talk about in a moment, the plague companies each come with their own contagion that through the through a strat in the book, the name's escaping me, flash outbreak, that's what it's called. You can actually take that contagion and duplicate it on another unit with the same plague company in your army. So that one can also travel, and you can organize to have all these things work synergistically. Of course, like I said, Death Guard, this means that you have to really carefully plan where your units are going to be, how you're going to achieve your game plan. And how I'm finding Death Guard is you kind of got to decide what are your biggest threats on the board, take care of them, and then just move on and enact your game plan, kind of independent of what the opponent's doing. Okay, so let's get on. Now we're going to talk about the plague companies. So we've been talking for about 20 minutes. I'm probably going to take another 20-30 minutes. You know, there's no hard cap to go over these. I'm going to try to keep these episodes down to 40 minutes. If you want them shorter, let me know. If you want them longer, let me know. Okay, so like I said, these are kind of put in an order where I think they're, based on their usefulness. And I mean, don't take this that you can't bring them to a tournament and win with them, because I'm not going to, I might put one at the bottom and then somebody's going to message me, well, I just won an RTT with these guys, so you're wrong. Yeah, I think they all can have play, but I'm just going to be telling you what I think the ones that have the most play, we're going to get the most value out of them. But of course, prove me wrong. Go win an RTT. Go win a GT with the worst one, in my opinion, and then hit me up and we'll talk about it. I'd be super happy to hear what you did there. Okay. So in a fall from grace, what do we got? The POXMONGERS. So in 8th edition, the POXMONGERS were the new kid on the block. Were the big bad guy, because you could have that relic on a character that made all the demon engines within, I think it was 6 inches of that character, a 4+ invul. So, I mean, at the time, Death Guard had the 5 of Feel No Pain, tough units like Plague Burst Crawlers and Blight Haulers and whatever else, tough 7, tough 8, and then you made them a 4+ invul. So that was really kind of potent and oppressive at times. Of course, with the release of the Death Guard 9th edition book, that was kind of toned back a bit. So now, what the actual relic, the Iron-Clawed Furnace that enabled that before, what's happened is now you choose that. I mean, there is a slight little buff there in the sense that instead of having to stay within that aura, the bearer can choose a POXMONGERS unit within 6, and now until the start of the next command phase has 4+ invul. So then that unit can actually just go fly out, be a 4+ invul, and live out its days, at least the next turn like that. So, I can see if somebody's running a lot of drones. I mean, max you can run is 3, but if they're running 3 drones and, I guess Greater Blight drones, they can be, sending them off to go do little missions on their 4+ invul, making it very annoying for their opponent. Why I don't really like it, though, because it doesn't really have any greater synergy, greater appeal than that. But of course, like I said, maybe I could be proven wrong. And on top of that, when you look at the Warlord trait, subtract 1 from leadership, 1 from combat attrition. I mean, like, who really cares, right? We're approaching these plague companies in the lens, like, how much value you can get out of all the different things. I'll answer your question at the end. I'll answer questions at the end. I'm not ignoring you guys. So, yeah, where was I? So, we're approaching these with the lens that we wanted to get the most value out of that plague company, because unlike a lot of other armies, I know Space Marines that have supplements, they don't bring a universal rule to your army. They bring a Warlord trait, a relic, and a stratagem. So you guys aren't walking around, innately better than guys without a plague company. It's just that you have access to these tools. So we're looking at these we're looking at these as how we can take advantage of all of the components. And unfortunately, I think the Warlord trait just falls a little flat. I mean, I feel like, yes, you can spend some time, subtract 1 from the leadership, and then you have the break their spirit strat, and you have spawn that are also -1. You could stack all these -1s, and then if they're under half and you got -1 for combat attrition test, now all of a sudden they're failing their, unless they roll a 1, they're failing their leadership test, and then they're taking combat attrition on a 1 to 3. But I feel like that's a long walk to a shallow pond. Right, especially if half or 70% of the armies you're going to face are MSU. I mean, and then on top of that, you're going to spend so much effort organizing all that. You're going to big brain it. You're going to have your spawn here. You know, your Terminators got in, and now they're within, or you've either flash outbreak them, or your Warlord's nearby. They've killed a couple of guys. You pop break their spirits on that big unit of Skitarii dudes. And you're like, you're going to fail this and you're going to lose half the unit. And you're super happy until then they either spend 2 CP or whatever the 1 CP strat is for AdMech. And they auto pass and they don't care. They kill everything that came in. And that's the end of the game. So that's why I feel like that one falls flat. And then you have Bilious Blood Rush is their stratagem. And what that allows you to do is, like, say your Plague Burst Crawler gets attacked and it's stuck in combat. Allows it to shoot its mortar in combat. Okay. And it doesn't suffer the penalty to -1 hit. I mean, like, look, that's a nice to have. I would use it if it was in the regular strats, but I don't feel like I'm going to go out of my way to get that strat. There's almost no times where I've really cared. I mean, if my entropy cannons are getting into combat, that's either the end of the game because they've killed everything and they got to my Plague Burst Crawlers, or they're in trouble because they're pretty close to me and everything else is just going to jump on them and kill them. Or I wanted that to happen because I've rushed my Plague Burst Crawler, and I've done that before. I rushed my Plague Burst Crawler out to bait them, and I'm wanting them to kill it so then I can auto explode and kill important characters. Like I did that to an Armor of Rust guy. You know, he took some splash mortal wounds, and then he, you know, the whole army charged the Plague Burst Crawler. I auto blew him up, killed Armor of Rust guy, so that just opened up the Space Wolves, go in and kill everything else. So that's why I feel like, unfortunately, Poxmongers are not where it's at right now with regards to, you know, at least my favorite ones. Again, like I said, hit me up if it's your favorite and you love it and you're winning with it. Next is Harbingers. So here's a big caveat. We're not talking about, what's it called? Terminus S, you know, Typhus and friends. We're talking about building a standard Death Guard army using Harbingers. Now, I love their strat. There are times where you're going to throw your Poxwalkers into a combat, and I've done that before. You pop the strat that they do mortal wounds on 6s to the enemy and 1s on you. And there are times where they just annihilate with those mortal wounds. But then there are times, like I've had a game where I put in 10 Poxwalkers, I popped that strat because I was like, oh, if I can just get 2 mortal wounds, I should be, you know, I'll be in a good spot. They roll no mortal wounds on the enemy, and I end up rolling 5 1s and losing half my squad. Well, this strat prevents you from doing that in the sense that you get to reroll all the hits, so you can fish for those 6s. So in that sense, you're getting more out of it than you're taking. So that actually makes Poxwalkers quite deadly, a lot more deadly than they deserve to be. So I do like that strat. It relies you on using Poxwalkers in that fashion. I mean, sometimes they're just sitting up objectives. Sometimes they're just running up the board trying to soak fire, being a nuisance. That'll depend on builds. I think Poxwalker stake, you know, the stocks in Poxwalker are a little down lately, but I mean, people can prove me wrong. But I do think that this strat is good. I wish it was a book strat rather than locked to a play company. Okay, so the Warlord. This is where I think this one kind of falls a bit, and what like kind of prevents me from really looking at it in terms of a list. You have the Warlord trait Shamble Rot, and similarly you have Infected Remains Relic. So both of them are kind of this contagion aura, where every unit within the contagion, every unit within that contagion on a 4 plus suffer 1 mortal wound. On a 6 they suffer D3 mortal wounds. I mean, it's not terrible, but what ends up happening in my opinion is you don't use that for most of the game. And I mean, how often are you going to have enough units around the dude with that it's going to make a big difference? I mean, if somebody's in the danger zone, if somebody's like jumping in there and he's surrounded by enemy, that half chance that he does 1 mortal wound or maybe D3 is not really what he's looking for. He either wants to be killier or he wants to be tougher, not splashing a mortal wound here and there. On top of that, and then using the infected remains, like, I mean, yeah, that's kind of annoying for an enemy, but like to really burn a relic, like we got a lot of good relics, to burn a relic slot to run up to an objective and put that on there. And I mean, like your Drukhari guy, he puts 5 Kabalites on there, takes 1 mortal wound. He doesn't care. He still has the objective because he's got OBSEC and you don't. I mean, he really doesn't care. So that's where I feel like this one falls flat. Those other two, and trust me, I tried to make this like AoE style army. I really tried hard to build a list where it was like just AoE mortal wounds and we were just throwing mortal wounds left, right, and center. And I never felt like this one was going to take value, and that having this was better than having some of the other ones we're going to talk about. I mean, again, prove me wrong. Okay, let's get rid of this one. Next one, the Wretched. So we're starting to hit plague companies that offer a bit more value, a bit more bang for the buck. So the Wretched, what that does is it really starts to tune up your Malignant Plaguecaster, and I can see why people like this one because the Malignant Plaguecaster is an awesome model. What is he? 95 points, comes with a little force D3 stave. He casts 2 spells, and I mean, not only being tough 5, -1 damage, whatever else, he casts 2 spells, and every time he successfully casts a spell on a 7 or more, he splashes an extra mortal wound to the nearest enemy and within 12. That's great. So here what you can do is you can give him another psychic power. He can't cast another one, but he knows another one. And I know there's times where I wished, like I wish he had one more power, because there's, like the DG powers are kind of situational. Some of them you'll use more often than others, but others you'll like, I wish I had it this time. And then once per phase, you can reroll the psychic test for that model. I mean, that's just great protection against stuff like miscasting or perils or whatever it's called now. And it's, or if you fail a spell or whatever else. So, I mean, that's not half bad. I feel like he says you can only use the stratagem once. I feel like it wouldn't have been too overpowered had they made it you can use the stratagem twice, depending on like the level. Like every other stratagem like this, like if you're a strike force, you can use it twice. If you're an incursion, once. If you're whatever else, 3 times. Because having 2 Malignant Plaguecasters running around, you'd be spending 2 CP, so it's not insignificant. Having them running around with the additional second power and rerolling, I think then I would be considering the Wretched a bit more seriously. But it's still not bad. I don't mind this one. The Warlord trait is when the enemy is within contagion range, each attack by a Wretched model automatically wounds an unmodified hit roll of 6. I mean, that's not bad, except we have a lot of quality attacks either. Wounding isn't often our issue. Of course, I mean, now that I think of it, right? Now that we're approaching a meta where you have AdMech that have that, of course, transhuman buff that they can put on big blobs of Skitarii units, I mean, that might not be the end of the world, right? You have, Death Shroud or whatever Terminators or even Plague Marines going in. And that's just an extra way you can wound them and circumvent that transhuman. So that might not be the end of the world. Sometimes I feel like some of the other contagions are more valuable more often. Of course, I could be wrong. And then this next one, the Wretched, the Demon's Favor. Each time a model successfully manifests psychic power, this test with 7 or more, the closest enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. Otherwise, the closest enemy unit within 6 suffers 1 mortal wound. So this is just basically upgrading your Malignant Plaguecaster to pretty crazy levels. So basically, if he does the 7 or more, he's doing basically a free smite within 12 inches. And then even if I read it correctly, even if he doesn't succeed in casting it, he still pumps out a mortal wound to an enemy nearby. It's good, but I feel like you have 3 relics you can take. And I feel like depending on your army composition, you're already up on relics. So, that one might be harder to justify. Of course, if you're approaching your army with the Wretched in mind, I can see how you'd take that. So, I mean, we're starting getting into the companies that I don't think the Wretched are that bad, but I feel like I prefer the other ones. The Wretched I'm going to put kind of in the same vein as the next one. So, it came before, so based on lists, it would be, in my opinion, weaker. But with the next one, I think they're probably equivalent. In fact, maybe even the Redwood's better than the one I put next. Okay, next one I put Chosen Sons. So, why did I choose Chosen Sons? Well, this kind of one got a little bit more stock, and reason why, because of AdMech, and I feel like AdMech is going to be there in the meta, at least for the foreseeable future. So why? The AdMech are going to be using a lot of Rust Stalkers with 2 wounds. They have a lot of high wound models with kind of low armor saves. And so what Mortarion's Chosen Son does, it gives you the access to that strat that all of the little flamers, like on your Death Shroud, and I mean, arguably, I think on your Lord of Virulence, though he's got a twin Plague Spewer, not a Plague Spewer. So you let me know what you think if that counts. But at least even the Plague Spurt gauntlets, you pop that 1 CP and now they become damage 2. So that's pretty good. So for example, if you're hitting up a unit of Rust Stalkers that are 2 wounds and I think 4 up save, every wound you get through is going to kill one versus, so it doubles the efficiency. Same thing with Space Marines. If you catch a unit of, Intercessors out, and for every save they're going to fail, they're going to lose a Marine. I mean, that's not half bad. The problem is it's sort of, with this one, it applies to so few units in the book that it's like you have to tailor your list to really take advantage of this and really consider where you're going to take advantage of this. And when you can't take advantage of this, it's like you have nothing to bring to the game anymore. Warlord trait. When a unit is within contagion range, attacks made by a friendly Mortarion Chosen Son does not receive the benefits of cover against that attack. I think now that we're starting to get these contagions that are a bit more valuable. Of course, this is good, but now it starts to compete. And the only problem with this one is it starts to compete with another Warlord trait later that is kind of this, but a little bit better. Of course, if we start to see a lot more units that have these special rules where if they're in cover, they have +2 to their save, like Eliminators, I think AdMech Infiltrators, one of those Infiltrator Rust Stalker units has that if they're in cover, they get +2 to their save. Then you're going to see more value out of that. In fact, this might even be a great one against AdMech because they have that army-wide, once per game, everybody's in cover, so you can kind of negate that. So that could be an option. Except now what you're doing is you're starting to tailor your army a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit too much towards one army, and you might start suffering against other armies. That's the challenge with list building, and we can go through list building and we can talk about Death Guard and how we're going to approach that later. I like this relic of Vomitrix. So basically this is tuning up your Foul Blight Spawns Flamer to be Assault 7, which I feel is amazing, right? It's like having max +1 shots with him, and he's a killer. He kills. Like everybody's always afraid of the Foul Blight Spawn. Not only does he have the fights last, but nobody that wants to get hit by his Flamer. Right now it's a D6 weapon, and you always have that opportunity to roll 2, and it's disappointing. He only does a couple of shots, so when he rolls 5, it's like super great. Here it's 7. I mean, I have considered taking this play company just for that, but one of the problems is the other relics you can take on a Foul Blight Spawn, Revolting Stench Fats. So now it's competing. You almost have to take 2 spawns, which I don't think is a bad thing. Some armies can probably take 2 Foul Blight Spawns, and then you would have to take this, but then you also have to take Mortarion's Chosen Son. So, I mean, it's a great relic, and I wish this one was a regular book relic, because then I would consider taking it on a second Foul Blight Spawn, but I feel like I'm doing too much leaning into Chosen Sons, and I think it's too much work to get that to work, and I think you lose too much by going with Chosen Sons, in my opinion. All right, so we're approaching the top 3, and the Ferrymen I feel are good, but where I'm struggling with them right now is a couple of things. In principle, they're good. We're a slow army, so we would want to, in theory, slow down the enemy to bring them to our level. That would be amazing. If you had a magic wand and you could pop a strat and look at an enemy unit and slow them to half range, you would use that every turn. If you had a spell that could do that, you would use that every turn. On Droning Wings, you would think you would use that every turn. One of the big issues with, for those that aren't aware, on Droning Wings is their stratagem. Or no, sorry, I'm referring to the droning. Yeah, The droning is their warlord trait, their contagion warlord trait, that while an enemy unit is within contagion range at the start of the opponent's movement phase, you half their movement characteristic until the end of that phase. I know, to steal a term from Adam Camilleri over at Art of War Down Under, there are too many terms and conditions associated with this. One, it has to be at the start of their movement phase. So, for example, if a unit started in a Rhino and you blew it up and they came out of the Rhino, they're not half movement. Two, because, now you're in the shooting phase, the psychic phase. Two, it's only the movement phase. So now it's not having their charges. If they get a movement, like a double move through the psychic phase, it's not having that, right? So, three, we don't have the amount of speed. Like I said, we do have some quicker units, and maybe you can put this on a drone, and if you had 3 drones, you could organize it, and I can see maybe that, but it really takes a dedicated list to take advantage of this, because you in it yourself don't have the speed, in my opinion, to put this where you want it. I mean, there might be games where it's super clutch and you have it and you put it and it wins you the game, and just because everything kind of fell into place. I just feel like you're working way too hard. I've tried this. I feel like you're working way too hard to get this to work. And sometimes the enemy army is not going to care. Like, for example, if I had a way to get this turn 1 into the Drukhari deployment zone where all of their raiders are all hiding on one little bunch, and I slow down all of the raiders, then I'd be okay. But the problem is you can't do that. Like, how do you get a drone? I mean, you'd have to run him. You'd have to roll a 6. You would have to cast the spell to increase the contagion range. Pop the strat, so your contagion range is 3, so that's a 9. So yeah, you're at 25 inches. So now you've only crossed 1 inch into his deployment zone to this contagion. So I mean, I feel like, and then on top of that, you run into the problems of, for example, if you want to slow down a unit, you run the risk of putting a unit so close to that slowed down unit that they charge your unit and gain the movement that way. Like, for example, what a horrible idea that would be if you ran a blight drone up within, say your contagion was 9 inches, say it was 6 inches, if you ran that 9 or 6 inches away from a unit of 30 orc boys, they would not care. They were, at this point, they're just happy that you got so close so they can charge you and slingshot across the battlefield. Now you have a huge problem. So I think that's one of the problems. Like, when you first read that one, you're like, this is the best. Everything's going to be the ferryman. The problem is in practice, it's like this divide between theory and practice that you get in science often. In practice, I feel like it falls flat. But for on-droning wings, the strat of the ferryman, this is where you start to see why now people are taking it. And I've actually taken the ferryman as a kind of second patrol often, actually, because of on-droning wings. On-droning wings is a strat that extends the range of your auras by 12 inches by 1 unit or by 12 inches. And I've used this significantly on a Revolting Stench Fats Foul Blight Spawn, which means that now all of a sudden there's this 24-inch diameter where the opponent's units that charge into that area don't get the benefits of charging. So if they're White Scars, they don't get any of their damage 2 on turn 3. They don't get shock assault. They don't go first. The first unit doesn't go first. So there's a lot of benefits to that. One of the problems is, and what I've seen in my own games is, it is expensive to start putting in a patrol, not only because of the CP restrictions, but because of the army construction restrictions. Because you're not talking a patrol with just a Malignant Plaguecaster and your Foul Blight Spawn. You're talking a patrol with your Foul Blight Spawn and 2 other elites that you want in that, which you may not want to, or your Foul Blight Spawn and a troop choice, but that troop choice can't be Poxwalkers unless you have a Bubonic Astartes. So you have to have Plague Marines at a minimum. I mean, I suppose you could probably do an auxiliary. I'd have to look at it, but you still run into this issue that you've got, you're spending a lot of CP to get this to work, whereas I feel like to respond to the meta, you don't need that wide. You've got a couple units you need to protect, and your 6 inches is enough, really, in my opinion. Because if you're keeping your whole army within that bubble, you might run into a risk that the other army is just going to dance around you, and they're going to outscore you if you're not covering more of the board. And so if you're covering more of the board, you're not going to be really inside of that, even if it's 24. I could be wrong. But then another issue too is, like, for example, you got the Ferryman's Scythe, which is cool. Like, it's a cool relic, but I mean, it just competes with all the other relics that I don't think really ever going to take this. So this is the problem. You're spending 2 CP plus a patrol, on the patrol, plus the taxes. So unless you're taking 2 patrols, or if you're taking a battalion, now you have to have an extra headquarters choice. So, Demon Prince, you have a Demon Prince, a Lord of Contagion, Lord of Virulence, you got a Demon Prince and a Malignant Plaguecaster, then you have a Malignant Plaguecaster, so that's points. And if you know Death Guard, it doesn't take long before you start to feel the point squeeze in your list building. Next. Okay, so I know I'm going to get a lot of comments about this, and I hope I do. This next one is the favorite, I think, of the internet, and a lot of great players that are more successful than I am. So maybe it is the best one. It's not my favorite one. The Inexorable. This is a good one. In my opinion, this is good for a couple of reasons. First, the Ferric Blight. That's a contagion. Like we had said earlier with Chosen Sons. Chosen Sons is good where it removes cover, and that could be situationally better than this. But I feel like Ferric Blight, improving the AP characteristic by 1 of weapons within shooting at a unit within that contagion range, just has a wider applicability. It's making your bolters AP1, your contemptors, if you bring contemptors, it's making their Volkites AP1. So I think it just has wider applicability. It's making your Plague Burst Mortars AP3. Even the little flamers, so there's a lot of applicability. Again, one of the challenges with this though is you have to place it, right? So it's not like you're gonna get AP1 against across the army. You have to decide who's gonna have it, when, and where it's gonna go to really take advantage of it. So there's a little bit of mental math going on there to have that work. And I mean, that's the case with any of these, but I feel like you do more of that on the offense than you do on the defense. Nevertheless, it's still been used to a lot of success, and I think most of the podiums or even wins that Death Guard have achieved have been with the Inexorable. A lot of this too is because of their stratagem, which is amazing. And I believe the stratagem is a carryover from War of the Spider. Pop this, and when somebody charges you, you can pop it and make them -2 to charge. I mean, that's clutch sometimes. Was playing my Crusade League. Okay, that definitely comes before seeing a stream. Okay, sorry for the interruption. So, like I said, Inexorable have that strat -2, and that can be clutch when if you didn't cover your backfield enough, or if you didn't have enough resources and somebody deep strikes in and wants to charge you and disrupt your backfield, you can pop that and make it a lot less likely. And now that Sisters don't have as many miracle dice, it may be also possible to use that to meaningful effect against Sisters, since they might not have this overwhelming pool of dice that they can just pop, pull 5s and 4s out of to get guaranteed charges. You might make that more difficult for them. You might make it so they have to burn key dice like 5s and 6s. So I can see the Inexorable showing up quite a bit, and I will also be playing with Inexorable. I will be testing Inexorable a lot more, because I do think it is one of the top, maybe the top one. I think one of the issues with the Inexorable is the relic, and I mean, it's a good relic. One of the problems with it is you really have to design your list for this. And, somebody like Don Huson did. He's taken a whole Demon Engine army, and that can really take advantage of this, right? Because you put on an Inexorable model, and then when an enemy model is destroyed as a result of melee attack by the bearer, you can select one Inexorable vehicle, and that vehicle regains 1 lost wound. I mean, I'm saying he might take this. I don't know if he takes this. One of the issues with this is it's not your vehicle that's killing that gets the wound back. Somebody else has to kill, has to be within 18 inches. It has to be somebody you want to get within 18 inches to kill. I mean, there's a lot of ifs and buts there, and I feel like you're not... I mean, there are games where you're going to pop 3 wounds on your drone or your Plague Burst Crawler, and it's going to be super awesome, but I don't feel like that's going to happen super often. And prove me wrong. I feel you probably have to practice quite a bit with this list to get it all working like a well-oiled machine. And I guess that's the case with a lot of armies, but I feel like maybe this one is not hitting quite the mark as often. This is not as useful as, in my opinion, the Warlord trait and Ferric Miasma. So we'll move on to the last one. I mean, process elimination. You know which one I'm talking about. we're going to go with Mortariion's Anvil. Why is this one my favorite? I feel like this is my favorite because it has the most application for the army. You will almost always have use for this. Let me go over why. Relaptic Assault. Use this stratagem in your opponent's charge phase. When an enemy finishes a charge move, and I'm reading this for a specific reason. Listen, select any number of Mortarion Anvil units from your army within 3 inches of that enemy unit. Until the end of the phase, the selected units are eligible to perform heroic intervention like a character. It is very key that you explain this to your opponent and you understand this. It's not select one of your units to perform a heroic. It's select one of their units, and any of our Mortarion's Anvil units within 3 can heroic into it. So you, if for some reason you have 3 units of Terminators around that unit of whatever nearby, they can all heroic into it, and that's crazy. And then people will say, well, Nick, I mean, everybody just plays around it, so you never get to use it, never get to use heroic. I mean, yeah, that's true. It's often you don't get to use heroic. However, I don't mind if people play around it. Sometimes it's nice having a threat without having to use the threat. For example, having people hum and haw on where they place their model because they're worried you're going to heroic is of value. I mean, they're wasting their time. They're spending a lot of cognitive effort trying to work through that, and you don't really care. I mean, there's been times I'm watching my opponent hum and haw where they're going to place their model. They make a mistake because they worried I'm going to heroic into them, and I have no intention of heroicing into them. It's also interesting because, as we're approaching a very MSU kind of OBSEC heavy meta, something like Drukhari, you can often be on objectives, and since we're not a very OBSEC heavy army ourselves, what they may end up doing to challenge our primary is they want to throw just a throwaway OBSEC unit onto that objective and prevent you from scoring those points. With that heroic, you can actually prevent that from happening now. Like you have to be clever about placing your models so that they can approach 3 inches anywhere of the objective. But if you're able to do that, now it means that if they want to try to just jump on that objective and steal it from you, you have an ability to challenge that. That they can't just steal it from you. So that's why I like that one. I mean, would I say the other Inexorable one was better? I don't know. I feel like I like tools that make the opponent play differently, regardless whether I use them. The other one does it as well. Gloaming Bloat. This is a great warlord trait. It's the one that prevents units from setting to defend or firing Overwatch, and it also prevents reroll of attacks and wound rolls in that contagion range. That's an excellent defensive buff, and it can be placed anywhere. You have a unit of Terminators sitting out on their own and they might be charged, you can place that over there and really start to neuter dedicated combat units that are going to charge them and bounce off. I've had that before. I've had a unit of 5 Blightlord Terminators sitting on objective and they got charged by Repentia, but I put Gloaming Bloat on them. The Repentia, because they couldn't reroll, bounced off the Terminators between hitting on 4s. Yeah, they wounded on 3s, but then my guys have 4 up involves and they're -1 damage. I lost 1.5 Terminators, and in return they killed like 8 or 9 or 7 of the Repentia, which neutered that charge, and that was all because of Gloaming Bloat. So I feel like you can really start to place these defensive buffs to really bolster up a flank that might be threatened by that. I mean, you can also have it on, like, say you have a Demon Prince and you put him a defensive buff on him, and you can have Gloaming Bloat on somebody else. But if you really want to tune up that Demon Prince for one phase, you could pass it on to him. So now he has either, hulking physique or disgusting or revolting resilient, and now he's got Gloaming Bloat, so he can go in there and start killing. Now, the Relic Warp Insect Hive. So, Mortarion's Anvil model. Only each time the bearer makes a melee attack can reroll the hit roll and reroll the wound roll. So, why do I like this one? I feel in my opinion, you'll only ever take that on Demon Prince, and that's what I do. Why is that? A lot of people come to me and say they take the Separating Plate and they take Rotten Constitution, so you have that 2+, ignore AP 1/2 Demon Prince, and he's super tough. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But why? What does that do? What does a 2+ ignore AP 1/2 Demon Prince do? He stands around and he doesn't die, but he does, because people aren't shooting bolters at him. They're shooting las cannons or whatever they are at him. So that doesn't matter. I mean, So yeah, I mean, I just feel like that doesn't matter. And the Demon Prince, if you're putting him in your list, he has to go do something. He has to make, he has to make his points back, and he can if you give him this. So one of the big challenges, what we lost to Demon Princes, I mean, one of the biggest issues we've had with Death Guard Demon Princes since the inception of Death Guard is that they'd never had plague weapons. So you've never re-rolling their swords or their claws or whatever they had. So that was always kind of an issue. And then since 9th edition, they lost their ability to give themselves a reroll once. So you can have that separating plate Death Guard Demon Prince go run into a combat. He's got a 6 attacks and you're ready to kill. You're throwing those dice and you roll 2 1s on your attacks and you're like, okay, I mean, fine. I got 4, that's fine too. And you roll 2 more 1s to wound. And now you're Death Guard Demon Prince. So you spend 185 points on, you put a relic and a warlord trait on him. He's done 2 wounds on whatever. Maybe he kills 2, 3 wound models, but really who cares? This guy needs to kill. Like, that's his one job. I want to kill. If he's not ready to kill, he's not in the list. And I think that's where Warp Insect Hive can do it. That's how I run him. And he's an absolute monster. He's killed Redemptors. I've had him kill half an army before just because of how kill he is with this. It's just that insurance, and now you're getting value out of him. You can throw him out there. He can do what you need him to do. And he's part of that speed that we're missing, that kind of pinpoint scalpel speed of killingness. So I like that one. I mean, it might not be a perfect answer. Other ones, a lot of these depend on how you build your list and why you build your list. So, I mean, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what's your favorite, which one you prefer, why you prefer it, why I'm wrong. I don't care. I'll read them and I'll comment back. Let me know how your games are going. So we've talked about today, I'll just reiterate, we talked about what I feel are the strengths of Death Guard, what are the weaknesses, and the plague companies. Next week, I want us to go over the relics and the warlord traits and the spells. But of course, let me know what you want me to talk about. Do you want me to talk about those first? Do we want to talk about list building? Do we want to talk about units? And so I intend to continue this, and we're going to go through kind of extensively Death Guard. Then we'll go through HQs. We're not going to do one HQ at a time because I'm not going to sit here and spend an hour talking about a Demon Prince. But we'll go through all the HQs in one episode, which one's the best, why we're using them, what they're doing in our list. We'll do that for troops. We'll do that for elites. We'll do that for, whatever, all the other units. And that, at the end, we'll come up with what the meta is looking like, and at that time we'll have a better 3 or 4 episodes, we'll have a better idea where Sisters and AdMech are placed in the meta, and we'll be able to look at our Death Guard list and see what we can do to kind of adjust to them. If you want, I play all kinds of chaos. If you want to talk about Thousand Suns, we can talk wish listing episode 2. If you want to talk about demons, builds, CSM, you let me know, we can do that. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Oh, we have questions, I'm sorry. Okay. Yes, Warp Time is Legion locked now. Yeah, if you're just joining us now, at the beginning, we just took a moment to discuss why I feel like the recent comment about TTS allowing Chaos Familiar strat from CSM to give Morty Warp Time doesn't work. It doesn't circumvent the intent of the fact. So, go back to the beginning of the episode and listen to it there. But we'll go over the questions and we'll see what we can add. I never Warp Time Morty anyways. Yeah, I don't know. I never felt good. I mean, I haven't paid it. He's sitting over there, and I don't know. I just feel like since 9th, well, I'm sitting here in Canada where we haven't been able to go to tournaments. So it doesn't really matter. I play a lot on TTS now. I do some practice with some really competitive players. I played a little bit in person. But I haven't really had this big tournament where I really want to dial in a super list. Maybe I would have considered it then, but since I can't go to tons of events, I might as well dial in like a mono Death Guard list because it feels like that's where Chaos is going. If you feel like you're going to still be able to soup like we've been before, I think you're a little mistaken. I think just get ready to lean into a mono Chaos book, whatever your favorite is, because I think that's where it's going. Outside of like Book of Fire and whatever else that will have detachments that might open that up. Who knows? Sorry I'm late. I was playing my Crusade League. Crusade League is way more important than this stream, but I'm super thrilled that you decided to still come check it out. Thank you. Units, then lists. Okay, Custodies then. So that's what we'll do. We'll go through the units, and then at the end, it'll kind of culminate into a list discussion session. I heard we are just weaker Dark Angels. What's your opinion on that? I mean, Dark Angels are tough, right? Because they can have that banner for -1 damage. They have the permanent transhuman. They're killing combat as well. They have the Dark Angels is challenging because I feel like they do the sit back and score points better than we do. Except I feel like we can build lists that challenge their primary and then their big strategy of just sitting back and hanging out and scoring points for doing nothing will work on some missions against some armies, but there's like 3 or 4 missions where they're just going to be fish out of water. So I feel like that's a dangerous play. And we also have a lot of more diversity in our list. I mean, they got the Talon Masters, but we got enough hiding that we can do, that we can target them. And like I said, with Glowing Bloat, you get a Talon Master out and you charge him and you pop Glowing Bloat on your guy. You can stop him from overwatching on you and then get in there and kill that dude. I mean, and even this Demon Prince, like they have transhuman, you throw him in there, there's a 5-man unit of Terminators with, transhuman, he can go in there and kill, because of his rerolls, kill. And then we have opportunities, for example, like if you're really worried about Dark Angels, you can throw in the Biologist Putrefier and just mortal wound those units to death. It's a bit of an unstoppable object hitting, like, what is it, the movable object and unstoppable whatever. I'm sorry, I'm really tired. You know what I mean? It's like that's kind of what it is, but I do think we have tools to fight them, and maybe we can spend an episode talking about how we approach different armies like Dark Angels. Units in Lesora's. Okay, thank you for doing this for Death Guard. I've been stumbling with them in the scene. I started them in 8th. Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, let's be honest, Thousand Suns and Death Guard in 8th, I feel we're a bit, they're flavor books. They're not really the style books like Space Marines or Tau is going to get, or like these bigger factions are going to get with all these super comprehensive rules and interactions. You're going to be a bit more focused. And so their weaknesses are going to be a bit more apparent, but I feel like they're going to have strengths that are going to be just a bit more generic that will be of value across more armies, right? So, and I feel like, personally, I know some people didn't like the Death Guard book. I think it's decent. Are we at AdMech or Drukhari levels of potency? No. Are we at the bottom? No, I don't think we are. I think somebody who's really been practicing with their Death Guard and tunes in their list, I think can do quite well in a tournament. What was that? What was that you put on the Demon Prince again? So my Demon Prince, I put the Warp Insect Hive because I run, at the moment, my latest list is just Mortarion's Anvil. I put Warp Insect Hive on him, and I put Revolting Resilient. So basically, my Demon Prince is running around. He can reroll hits and wounds with his sword. Each time the bearer makes a melee attack, you can reroll the hit. So now I'm learning he can do that with his claw too. I, for some reason, was just running it on his sword. Anyway, so he can do that with his claw too. My Demon Prince is even better now. I'm just reading it. So yeah, he rerolls hits and wound rolls on his sword. I give him wings, of course. Some people say don't give him wings. I say you don't take a Demon Prince unless you give him wings. Bottom line. And then I give him Revolting Resilient. So that's the old Feel No Pain. So now even if people are squeaking wounds through him, he still has an opportunity to save those with his Revolting Resilient. And then I also play the cheeky jump up across the board, and he can, skip between Death Shroud units to protect him. So we can go over a tactic session, how you approach that, how you're able to project the Demon Prince's force without actually risking him, which makes him actually quite dangerous. Do you think Khorne and Slaanesh will get fleshed out in 9th? I really hope so. I feel like World Eaters. So I'm not a big World Eaters fan, nor I Emperor Children's fan. I'm a Thousand Suns. Like, top 3 armies for me are Thousand Suns, Demons, and Death Guard. I'm playing Death Guard because they have the 9th ed book right now. I've never been a big fan of World Eaters and Emperor's Children, but I feel like they should have their own books similar to Thousand Suns and Death Guard. Will they get that? I mean, it's anybody's guess. I would hope so, because it would be like a huge release for GW. I'm not even a fan, but if they released Emperor's Children like they released Thousand Suns of Death Guard, I'm just gonna buy it all. I mean, and I feel like everybody else would do that too. I mean, at the very least, CSM will get a book. And so they will have some rules in there, probably very similar to what Psychic Ritual had, where they had their kind of own list of strats and whatever else. So you'll have that, but I know it doesn't feel as good as having your dedicated book with dedicated units, but we'll see. I mean, if it was up to me, if I was running the show at GW, they would be having their own books like the Death Guard and Thousand Suns. Yeah, I agree. They have their own god to serve. So I definitely think they should have that as well. So listen, thanks everyone for tuning into the show. I really appreciate everybody listening to this, and I'm not just talking to myself. I enjoy doing this because I enjoy, talking with the community. I guess especially COVID times, this is kind of one of the ways you can reach out with your community, since I haven't been able to go to events, and that's where I like to talk to people and whatever else. So thanks for tuning in. We're going to try to do this as consistently as we can every Thursday at 8. And I mean, if you have any other questions, throw them up in the YouTube comments, or you can hit me up in the CanHammer Discord. Just at me, because I don't check it that often, to be honest. I'm not really good with Discord. Or you can bug Darren. Definitely love it when you bug Darren, so do that. Yeah, check me out next week. Again, tell your friends, like, share, subscribe, because this gets it out to more people and a bigger community that we can put together and, build up this little chaos thing we got going on. Have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you guys